It's Max Ralph and Johnny McGonigal here on the Blue-White Breakdown on PennLive, our Penn State YouTube channel, or if you're listening somewhere else for a podcast, wherever you like to tune in for us. But it's me and Johnny again, and we are coming back with another one of these mailbag pods, which we started last week. I know, Johnny, you and I both had a lot of fun doing this one last week, so wanted to make it at least a weekly thing or close to a weekly thing. So let's get right into it. I mean, obviously, Penn State, a huge win this past weekend. Bob and I talked about it a lot already on a podcast this week, and we're going to keep talking about it because it was such a big win, but a much-needed bye week here right now. So let's get into a couple of the questions, Johnny. And the first one we got didn't have a name attached to it, but they were worried about Nicholas Singleton, obviously Penn State's star running back. He really didn't have a great game against USC. He did have the late touchdown, but the big rushes just really weren't there. He had the big one to start, but then it just didn't necessarily seem right. Maybe not 100% healthy. Johnny, what's your read on the situation?
Yeah, Max. First and foremost, thanks for filling in for me earlier this week with Bob. I normally do the kind of the post game, day or two after. Was feeling pretty under the weather after the USC game, and still fighting back, still playing hurt, as Bob would say. But really happy to be able to do this podcast with you today, and echoing your sentiments of thanking our subscribers for submitting these questions because it's a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. Nicholas Singleton, I mean, he ended up having 10 carries for 26 yards at USC. I think he opened the game. The first play offensively for Penn State was about a 9 or 10 yard run. I think it was a 10 or maybe 11 yard run by Nick Singleton right up the middle. And when that happened, Max, we're in the press box, and I'm like, okay, this is going to be this is going to be Singleton and Allen today. They're going to run it down their throats, like kind of what I expected the game script to be. For Penn State, closer to what they did against Illinois and ultimately what Minnesota did against USC just a week prior of, taking advantage of what seemed like a pretty soft USC run defense. And, from the jump with that first carry, I thought it was going to be like that, and it wasn't. There were times where, maybe where the rotations would come in between him and Katron. Nick was on the sideline. Katron was out there, out-snapped. Well, actually, I don't think he did out-snap him. I think the snap counts were pretty similar, pretty even between those two. But, the carries, I think, Katron had a few more than Nick did and was a little bit more effective on the day running the ball. So, I mean, you could surmise that maybe Nick wasn't 100%. Coming into the game after missing the UCLA game, bumps and bruises after the Illinois game, took a beating there. It was good to have him out there, but he wasn't his normal effective self, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was some carryover, in terms of a bumps and bruises standpoint.
100% in the same boat there with you. I think this bye week comes at a really good time, which we're gonna talk about that more with some other questions that we got, but it's definitely true. I don't think that he was his best self against USC, but he was good enough that I think coming out of the bye week, he'll probably be fine. So let's move on to the next one. Or you got something else you want to say, Johnny?
Just one more quick thing, because I thought, in terms of the snap counts, I just looked it up. Mm-hmm. Nick Singleton had 43 offensive snaps. Katron had 41. Okay. Which I think if you watch that, like just watching that game, the way we did and the way all the fans did, I don't think you would have thought that, given how it seemed like Nick might have disappeared for a time there during the game. But in reality, he outsnapped Katron according to Pro Football Focus. So just an interesting tidbit there.
Yeah, we definitely had a few people who kind of reached out via Twitter or something and said, hey, where's Singleton? Like, I mean, I noticed it felt like he was on the sideline a fair bit, but credit to USC and what they did as a run defense. They really did a nice job shutting Penn State down in that game, which I was surprised about, as you were. So, again, just a great game all around, expecting Nick Singleton to be himself by the Wisconsin game. Let's move on to a question from Jack Dudrick. Jack, you like to interact with us a lot on subtext, and we love it. What are the chances? This is a fun one. What are the chances of keeping Andy Kotelnicki next season in Happy Valley? This one's pretty open-ended, Johnny, and I feel like we could both go very different ways here.
Yeah, it's one of those where it's hard to prognosticate this now when
Hmm.
we don't know what the coaching carousel is going to look like, even next month. We know that teams across the country will sometimes cut ties with their coaches in November, just like James Franklin did with his offensive coordinator last year with Mike Yurcich.
Hmm.
But head coaching, positions will crop up across the Power Five and across the maybe even attractive G5 jobs will pop up here in the next few weeks. So we don't know what those jobs are going to be. What I do know is that Andy Kotelnicki is from Minnesota, small town guy in Minnesota, but hasn't limited himself to coaching in that area of the country necessarily.
Hmm.
Obviously, at Penn State now, was at Kansas prior, Buffalo. Was in Wisconsin, Whitewater for a while, and had a lot of success there with Lance Leipold. So, would I expect him to, be in the running for a job out on the West Coast? Like, not necessarily. But wouldn't rule it out either. We've seen coaches just, especially guys who just have a phenomenal scheme and are really good with their players. Which both of those things have been true so far with Andy. We were told that when I was talking to some of his former players when he got hired back in December of what to expect. And speaking to the players and the coaches at Penn State right now, he's lived up to everything that people thought he would be.
Hmm.
From an explosive play standpoint, from a player relationship standpoint, from a development standpoint, he's been good. And so if that continues, and if Penn State continues to play well on offense, he's going to be an attractive candidate to be a head coach somewhere. But what are the odds of keeping him? It's kind of hard to say. And I'm sorry,
Hmm.
I hate giving non-answers like that, but it is really hard to say.
The I think you hit the nail on the head. I use that expression all the time when I talk to Bob. I need to stop myself from doing it so much. um, but no, I think you're right. I do think that he will be a head coach someday. I'll
Mhm.
just put it that way. But there is the factor that he hasn't been a head coach before. And, maybe somebody's a little bit hesitant about that. He's in a great position right now at Penn State. I mean, this is the highest level job he's had. He's doing it really well. Here's a piece of it that I was thinking about that I'm not sure how you feel about it, Johnny, but he has Drew Aller right now, who is probably a top 5 quarterback prospect in this year's NFL draft, maybe, depending on how this season ends up. If Drew goes and he doesn't have that bona fide starting quarterback next year, is there more incentive for him to get out and go to a group of 5 job where he could, kind of make his own thing and move that offense, but still, be running his own program? Or I wonder, like, not saying that Penn State's going to have terrible quarterback play if Drew leaves, because there's so many variables that, you could pick out and that could change. But I'm just saying, Drew has been really good. It's been
Yep.
a wonderful partnership between Andy and Drew. If he's gone and Andy has an opportunity, do you think that plays a part at all?
Yeah, I mean, of course, like that, obviously there's so many different pieces to this offense. Like we know Tyler Warren's going to be gone,
Hmm.
who has been Andy's favorite piece to play with
Yeah.
so far. We saw that at USC, but the quarterback is such a huge part of this. And so on the flip side, Max, I mean, if Drew decides to come back, even if he has a good draft grade and he decides to come back for a third year as the Penn State starter, that could be a positive for Andy. And so, yeah, it's interesting. And I'll say this too, in terms of Andy one day leaving to be a head coach, I agree with you. I do think he'll be a head coach someday.
Hmm.
But the process of getting him from Kansas to Penn State, it was a very deliberate and drawn out process. And, Andy went through all the proper channels and like took his time in making his decision because he was so comfortable where he
Hmm.
was at Kansas with Lance Leipold, a head coach that he had been with, like I mentioned, at Wisconsin Whitewater and Buffalo before that. So he was super deliberate in making sure that that was a move coming to Penn State that would benefit his career, both in the short term and the long term. So I don't think he's a guy who's just going to jump at the first head coaching opportunity that's thrown his way. He's very calculated, very measured, in his approach to everything, coaching and his own career. And so I think that's something to keep in mind as well. That if you see his name pop up for a mid-level job in November or December, don't necessarily worry that he's going to leave. Like, he's going to he's the kind of guy I think who would take his time and make sure that whatever his next move is a really good one.
Yeah, that's another great point that I was thinking about with the whole thing. Is he's been slow to do things, and we talked with him again. Today's Wednesday. We talked with him on Zoom today, and he brought it back up. Growing up in Litchfield, Minnesota, he was a Penn State fan. So like this is a cool opportunity for him. It's the highest level he's coached at so far. He's got all the resources he could want. I think if I were in his shoes, I'm probably staying another year. But it's so hard to say because I do think if you lose Tyler Warren, you lose Drew Aller, you lose Julian Fleming, you maybe lose both Nick Singleton and Katron Allen.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? Like, it might be a situation where you say, well, let me capitalize while my value is as high as it might be. So I'd put it at like maybe 60-40 he stays, but it's really hard to put a number on it.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So our next one, wanting some insight into our travel over the weekend, Johnny. This one comes from Chris. Wants to know how USC, that classic West Coast Big Ten member, compared to the other Big Ten schools that we've seen. You've probably seen a few more than I have, but I've seen my fair share. So yeah, and he did mention, seemed like it was a bit of an NFL type atmosphere in the Coliseum, which allowed Penn State fans to kind of take it over. And there was a great Penn State contingent there on the weekend, I will say. But I'll leave it to you. How do you think that atmosphere, the Coliseum, USC in general, kind of fits into the Big Ten?
It was weird. I'll say this. I liked the Coliseum. Like, it's a historic venue for X amount of reasons, hosted all these different events, obviously the Olympics and some Super Bowls and, just huge events, in sports history. So, to cover a game there, to be there, to watch Penn State play a game there was really cool from that end of it. It was cool to see Penn State's fans, like you mentioned, Max, kind of take over, especially in overtime, especially when Penn State's, the game tying drive and the USC reporters were even tweeting during the game when Penn State was staging their comeback, coming back, from down 20-6 at halftime to tying it, that the Penn State fans were as loud as that they've heard, away team fans take over the stadium. There were Penn State players pumping up the crowd at that point. So that's when you kind of know that you've got a really good contingent in the crowd. The game day operations end of it, like, and I guess this is,
I know where you're going, Johnny.
The guy who continued to yell and say, USC fans, Penn State fans have requested that you be quiet. What do we say to that? It was the most cringe stuff I have heard in a stadium.
Dude, they did it at least 10 times. It was bad.
At least 10 times. They need to get rid of it. I'm not saying they have to fire the guy, but get rid of that feature because it made no sense and it was terrible. But I think it also kind of speaks to the fact that they did it 10 times, that they needed to kind of draw the energy and the noise out of the crowd, because I think USC fans and maybe even LA sports fans in general are stereotyped a bit into being fair weather or casual fans, and them having to do that as many times as they did didn't necessarily pour water on that stereotype or on that notion.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it worked the first time they did it, to be fair.
Yeah.
I thought the DJ and whatever was fine the first time. Then he did it again, and I was like, well, it kind of loses its luster. And then he did it again and again and again, and it sucked. It was weird.
Yeah.
Their pregame video was awesome. Like, their pregame hype video was probably the best I've seen in person. The stadium itself, great. I've seen, I guess, excluding some of the new entrance into the Big Ten, I've seen pretty much all of the stadiums except for Minnesota and Nebraska. So I've got a pretty good handle on these stadiums. The Coliseum was really cool. I'm with you. Like, it's a beautiful stadium. The overview of the skyline and the San Gabriel's in the background, just beautiful. But the atmosphere was lacking for sure. Penn State, I know Amin Vanover made a big play, and he ran down the field and was waving to fans. And, it's a credit to Penn State fans because they travel well everywhere, but like this was different. It's definitely, I think it's part of the fact that USC doesn't always draw huge crowds. As awesome as the Coliseum is, people always talk about how the crowd is never full. There's always empty seats. So it was a fantastic experience for us. Open air press box was cool. Like, we don't get a lot of those in the Big Ten with weather, so that was fun. The staff, like the way they treated us, was a little bit of a different feel than a Midwestern vibe. It was a little more luxurious, and that's not a knock on any program that we visited, because media relations, stadium relations, whatever, always treats media well. But they're like opening the press box door for us every time we go in and out and saying good morning. Like that's just
It was weird.
it's the LA hospitality, man. And then they brought beer into the press box afterwards. So
Yeah.
it was a fun experience. I'm happy to have USC on our list of future trips. Looking forward to going back, because I do think atmosphere wise it was lackluster for the Big Ten, but definitely it was a cool experience overall.
Definitely. One small thing I'll add to that too, and this is from talking to some of the Penn State fans who were in the crowd at the Coliseum. They said that they could barely hear the band, and
Oh,
the USC band, which is known as a pretty good band. And then you have all the the horse comes in, and all the pregame stuff was pretty cool. But they were like, from where they were sitting, they could barely hear the band, and I think that's just the way excuse me, the Coliseum is designed, where all the sound kind of goes out of it and not
yeah,
in, where, compared to maybe, Autzen, at Oregon, or just the stadium design.
yeah.
So that was, I guess, unfortunate for those fans who didn't get to hear the band and some of the stuff that was going on the field.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I did really like the pregame show from the band. The on field formations they made were really impressive. But let's get the next one. This is kind of a two-parter from a couple of different subscribers who sent us a message. Do you think Wisconsin's a trap game? This is from Brian G. Do you think Wisconsin's a trap game? And is the USC win kind of the character building win that Penn State needs to go on and beat Ohio State, or have reach its goals that it wants this season? And then just kind of folding that in, we also got a question from Carol K that asked who we think maybe is dangerous as a Penn State opponent down this second half of the schedule. So just kind of a forward thinking question here, Johnny.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in terms of Wisconsin, if there's an opponent that scares you outside of Ohio State for the rest of the year, I think it would be Wisconsin. I think by definition, it would be a trap game because it's the week before Penn State hosts Ohio State, which at this point, even after Ohio State lost to Oregon, it's still shaping up to be a top 5 matchup,
Yes.
which will bring everyone, national media. It'll obviously pack Beaver Stadium, biggest game of the year, and one of the biggest games at Beaver Stadium we'll have hosted in a handful of years. But the fact that Penn State has a bye week before going to Wisconsin, I think is a big deal.
Yeah.
They're able to focus. But you look at the way that Wisconsin has performed over the last few weeks, like when they got trampled by Alabama in that non-conference game, 42-10, and Tyler Van Dyke, their transfer quarterback from Miami, gets hurt. I'm like, oh God, like what is Luke Fickell really going to do here with this team? Like, they don't seem like they have much of an offensive identity. And I don't necessarily think those issues have been solved, but they blew out Purdue, surprisingly blew out Rutgers
Right.
in New Jersey this past weekend. I think it was 42-7. Their running back Walker has, I think, six touchdowns in the last 2 games. Ran for almost 200 last weekend against what we thought was going to be a pretty good Rutgers run defense. So there's definitely some things at play there at Wisconsin. It's going to be a night game. It's going to be a raucous environment. We know that. Camp Randall can get up, and not just with the jump around, but they can get pretty loud there. So I'm looking forward to the jump around, by the way, Max.
Okay.
Very much looking forward to it.
You haven't been to Madison for the jump around yet, have you?
I have. No, I have. I was there. I've been there a couple times, but this was like over 10 years ago. So it's been a while. I'm looking forward to going to State Street Brats on Friday night in Madison. Looking forward to the game on Saturday night. Should be fun, but it's a game that Penn State can't take lightly. They know at this point, after beating USC, which I thought and many people thought, looking at the schedule ahead of the season, that it would be their second toughest game, especially going out to the West Coast and all the logistical issues that come with that. Now that they're past that, and I do think that winning the way that they did, being down by 14 at halftime, winning in overtime, winning a tight game, it felt like a bigger game than it was against a 3-2 Big Ten team, right? Like, that team is talented. They've got top 20 talent. So I do think that is the type of win that can propel you and give you confidence, going into a potential, a game against Ohio State. But you got to get by Wisconsin first, and I don't think this team can look past them.
Yep. You echoed a lot of the things that I said yesterday with Bob. Camp Randall's cool. I saw it for that 2021 game where Jaquan Brisker had the game-ending interception. Yep. It was a noon game that day, so I don't think the jump around was as good as it'll be this time. But the one thing I will say, I 100% agree that the USC win was that kind of character builder that you might be looking for, because those Penn State teams in the past few years, I'm not sure they win it. I said that with Bob. I'm not sure they win that game with the way that they had to come back and make big plays in certain moments. So I think it was huge. I think it's a confidence booster down the stretch. The other thing I'll say, you mentioned that USC team is good. They absolutely are. Don't be surprised if they lose another game or two down the stretch, because after you've lost 3 games with a team that you think is more talented than your record already is, it can be kind of hard to be able to finish out a season strong. I will say, it's a mental thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if they lose again, or to whoever it is. But don't discount what Penn State did against USC for that, which is going to be kind of hard to keep in mind when you go through evaluating this season. But if I had to pick a team that is dangerous down the stretch, I truthfully don't think it's Washington. They did beat Michigan. They've got some talent, well-coached team. You come into a whiteout environment, I just don't think – I don't see it. Minnesota is definitely there. PJ Flex teams are always pesky. They've beat USC. They've played a good brand of football. Penn State's got to go on the road. It's a tough place to play, especially in the middle of November when the weather could be anything. Could be really bad. So we obviously know Minnesota played spoiler to a really good Penn State team a few years ago. So I think they're up there. Hey, man, don't count out the Boilermakers. They do crazy things when top 5 teams come into town. So they've been bad this year. They played Illinois really tight this weekend, though. That freshman quarterback looked good in relief of Hudson Card. They fired the offensive coordinator. I'm just saying, I would not want to go to Ross-Ade Stadium in late November with a small little number next to my name. So those are the two I'll say. I don't think by any means, I will never predict that Purdue beats Penn State, no matter what. But, crazier things have happened, man. So I think Minnesota is the dangerous one, but Purdue, you got to keep an eye out.
Oregon's got to watch out this Friday. They play.
They do.
At night, 28-point favorites. I'm liking the points. I'm not liking Purdue to win, but I'm liking the points there.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the last question we've got to wrap this one up. Had a lot of fun. Again, just a reminder, we are very thankful for these questions. We love getting these big picture ones too, because we have multiple podcasts a week where we're talking about the game. We're talking about the Penn State team specifically. So to be able to kind of do a switch up, I know, Johnny, we think it's a lot of fun. So we appreciate this.
And then, and also on that, Max, if we didn't get to your question, because we got a lot of entrants, if we didn't get to your question, we will respond to you on our subtext, or Absolutely. Even if it's an evergreen question, maybe save it for next week. Yes. So continue to send those in. Don't get discouraged if you don't hear it on this week's podcast. We'll definitely get to you.
Yeah, 100%. This last one from Jeff High. What should Penn State put extra emphasis on during this bye week? And then we also got a question from Brent, who asked about the fast starts from this offense and wondered how much does it really matter, because Penn State is 6-0 this year. So for Brent and Jeff, let's dive into our bye week checklist for Penn State.
Yeah, I mean, I think to answer the question of what they need to work on in the bye week, it is starting fast.
Mhm.
starting faster. How do you do that? That's a job for Andy Kotelnicki, Drew Aller, the receivers, the line, the running backs. Sometimes it's just a little tweak. Sometimes it's a receiver running a slightly wrong route and you get an incomplete pass and boom, you have to punt.
Mhm.
It's just getting on your P's and Q's early and making sure that everyone is comfortable with the game script and everyone is on the same page. Because you look at what Penn State has done this year in the first quarter, they've only scored 24 first quarter points
Mhm.
through 6 games. They've had 2 opening drive touchdowns on their
Should have
opening.
had 3, but
Sorry.
should have had 3,
Should have
but
had 3. Yeah. You could definitely argue that the defender initiated the contact with Julian Fleming, negating the Tyler Warren touchdown at USC. So you can certainly argue it should have been 3, but the record shows that it's 2, Max.
right.
So two touchdowns on opening drives in their in their 6 games, and both of those came against Bowling Green and Illinois in response to opening drive touchdowns
Mhm.
from Bowling Green and Illinois, and so they kind of got popped in the mouth and had to respond when they haven't been popped in the mouth necessarily. They haven't. So I think that's something that they need to work on because, look, you certainly, they survived it this weekend.
Mhm.
They survived it at USC. If Ohio State is taking a 14-point lead on you, I don't know, if you can, fight uphill against a team of that talent, of that caliber, and come out and win. So, I think the fast starts on offense and defense too, because we've seen that this team is a third quarter defense, right? Making those adjustments at halftime. Tom Allen and the guys doing well in the third quarter and the second half. But I think you'd like to be a little bit better in the first half as well.
Yeah. To respond to Brent directly, they do matter to start fast. Penn
Yes.
State has started 6-0. They've weathered it, like you said, Johnny. But it's going to catch up to you at some point if you're always not the making the first punch. It's like a boxing match. If you're getting hit in the mouth at the start of every round and then trying to come back, like it's tough. And so it will catch up to them eventually, especially against a good team like Ohio State. The other thing, like the bye week checklist, I mean, they've kind of solved a lot of the problems that we already had identified early in the season. Like the penalties, they were terrible through 4 games, and then they cleaned them up really nicely. They have not struggled with it the past 2 games. The run game has been strong. I do think that they might want to look back at that and put in some new stuff because the run game struggled a little bit the past 2 weeks. But again, that's without what we think is a 100% healthy Nick Singleton. So can't really necessarily look at it too much. I just think that they've already done a pretty good job of fixing things. It came on the defensive side too, with Tom Allen going up into the booth and no longer being the guy on the headset and having Dan Connor do it. They've done some really good adjustments so far. The big one that's left is those fast starts and, of course, getting healthy because they've lost. We know the guys that they've lost, like KJ Winston, Cam Wallace, Andrew Rapplier, but there's also plenty of guys who've been banged up, bumped and bruised, as we always say, like Nick Singleton, for example. They got to get those veterans making sure they're fine. Like I was at practice last night, and it's the Tuesday of a bye week after a huge win on the West Coast. It was unsurprisingly a little bit less intense than it's been all season, and that's a good thing. That's exactly what James Franklin and the staff should be doing. These guys have been going at it hard since camp. Everybody talked about how physical this training camp was. So, like, to get a chance to just kind of relax and have a week where you're working on the little things but not killing your bodies, it's important. Get those guys physically ready to go because it's going to be another tough one in Camp Randall.
Put Tyler Warren in bubble wrap during the bye week.
Yes, absolutely. The guy needs to be protected at all costs because that is a thing that we've said a few times or maybe hinted at. But without Tyler Warren, this team might be nothing.
Yeah,
So
I mean, for a while there, in the USC game, it looked like their offense was Tyler Warren or nothing. And I don't mean to shortchange the wide receivers because I actually think they had a sneaky productive day at
yeah, he did.
USC. I think over the course of the season, the top 4 wide receivers on this team, Harrison Wallace, Liam Clifford, Amari Evans, and Julian Fleming. I think they're averaging like 17 yards a reception.
Yeah.
So they've been pretty productive when given the opportunity. But I do think going off of that, Max, I do think that this offense needs to, find its explosive, plays again, because you look at the Illinois game, UCLA, and USC. The number of explosive plays that they've created over the last three games has dipped, a noticeable amount since the non-conference, and maybe that was because you were going up against. I mean, they started out really well at West Virginia, and then
Mhm.
you go up against Bowling Green, which offensively was good, but defensively was a MAC team,
Right.
and then Penn State. So maybe just the numbers were skewed, and we weren't supposed to expect the offense to remain that explosive as it got into Big Ten play. But when you've got Ohio State upcoming, Washington is a well-coached defense, even though they just gave up 40 to Iowa.
Mhm.
I think there are some defenses left on the schedule that can still, make you play in a phone booth and
Mhm.
try to take away that explosive play. And it's going to be on Andy Kotelnicki and the rest of the offense to find different ways, like having Tyler Warren, snap it and run down and catch a 50-yard touchdown,
Mhm.
to create those.
Yeah, I think the good thing though is that to this point, Penn State has proven it can win even when it's not making the huge plays. Like
Yes.
they really weren't there against USC, but they were consistent. They made the plays when needed, and I think that's huge. Like you got to win in different ways in college football, and so far Penn State has done it, which is about as encouraging a thing as I think you can say about them right now. So we had one last comment. It wasn't really a question from David, where he just said, "This has been an awesome CFB season to watch so far." And Johnny, I think we just wanted to close this out by saying, "Yeah, we're with you, David." I mean, you can go down the line. Ashton Genty. I mean, Travis Hunter's been pretty awesome. Tyler Warren, a tight end, should probably go to New York for the Heisman, if you ask me.
Maybe.
Um, like, there's some really good things. Alabama beating Georgia and then losing to Vandy, and everything that Diego Pavia has been so far this year. This has been a really entertaining season, and especially for Penn State fans, like you're going to want to be tuned in the rest of the way, because this team's going to compete for a Big Ten championship. They've put themselves in the position that they kind of control their own destiny the rest of the way. So it's going to be fun.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've had like those marquee matchups, right? Like the Georgia Alabama game was insane.
Mhm.
Ohio State Oregon was a lot of fun, watching that over the weekend after the Penn State USC game. But for me, Max, it was like 2 weekends here that we've had that you look at the schedule and the slate, the college football slate, and you're like, oh, like this kind of sucks. Like there's no 2 versus 5 or 3 versus 6 to like get really hyped up and juiced up for. And
Mhm.
then you get Vanderbilt beating, Alabama. You get, Kentucky, almost beating Georgia, Kentucky beating Ole Miss. Like there have been a lot of these upsets, a lot of these crazy games that have happened on the weekends that you'd least expect it. And that just, I mean, that's college football in a nutshell. But please keep up that energy
Mhm.
for the rest of the season because it's been a lot of fun to watch. And if you're a Penn State fan, you're probably hoping that that doesn't happen. Obviously, to the Nittany Lions, that they don't get tripped up by a Wisconsin or Purdue, that they don't get Purdue'd. So we'll see though. We'll see. That's why. Look, I know it's coach speak. It's cliche, and I've rolled my eyes a few times when he said it in
Yep.
the past because he always does. But James Franklin talking about being 1-0 and about how cherishing wins and it's difficult to win. Yeah, I mean, shoot, he said that after Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame. So
That
I
was a
think
shot. I mean,
I
let's,
think
let's let's just say it. That was a shot when he
yeah, he
said
was he was pretty direct with direct while being indirect
right.
with that. But yeah, it's a thing, and Penn State is one of a handful of 6-0 teams left across the country. So cherish that while they have it, and
Mhm.
I'm sure Penn State fans are going to be hoping that they're 6-0 down the rest of the stretch too.
Yeah, it's annoying to keep saying, but you really do. You got to enjoy the win when you take it. So,
Yeah.
especially coming off a bye week, a huge win at USC, Penn State's going to cherish this one. This has been a really fun podcast. Again, we'll probably catch you next week or maybe 2 weeks since we had the bye week this week, but we'll do another one of these soon. Johnny and I love doing it, so keep the questions coming. This has been the Blue White Breakdown. Johnny McGonigal and Max Ralph here on Penn Live.